The Galactic Empire had never taken Earth seriously. From their mighty citadels floating in the endless void of space, they watched as humanity tried to play with the big leagues. Their ships, their technology, their weapons, all were considered inferior. The galaxy had seen civilizations rise and fall, but Earth was just another planet in the farthest corner, not even worth a second glance. But today, something was different. The Galactic Empire's High Council had gathered in their grand meeting hall, a room of polished black stone and cold, calculated design. Massive towering beings from different worlds surrounded a holographic map of Earth and its fledgling fleet. The representatives of the Empire's most powerful races snickered at the small, flickering blips on the map. Their fleet was a mighty, unstoppable force, and humanity's so-called prototypes, ships designed from the best of Earth's technology, were laughable at best. These fragile toys. One of the alien leaders sneered, his multiple eyes narrowing in mockery. You think these primitive ships can stand against the might of our empire? Laughter echoed throughout the room. Even the human ambassador, who had been forced to attend the meeting in a desperate plea for survival, clenched his fists and bowed his head. It was an insult, and yet he knew he had no choice but to endure. The fleet Earth had managed to assemble was nothing compared to the colossal warships the Empire had at its disposal. A mere handful of ships, many of them untested prototypes, against an entire armada. The odds were overwhelming. Despite the mockery, Earth's leaders had refused to back down. They knew the Empire underestimated them, but the technology they had developed, though new and untested, held the potential to change everything. The humans had spent years researching, developing, and perfecting their prototype ships in secrecy. These ships weren't the same as the rest. They were built with the unique combination of Earth's ingenuity and a series of technological advancements no one had anticipated. One of the human officers, Captain Sarah Mitchell, stood silently in the control room of the flagship prototype ship. Her eyes were focused on the massive holographic screen in front of her. The map showed the movement of the Empire's fleet, vast and menacing. They were on their way to Earth, ready to crush everything in their path. Sarah's fingers brushed against the smooth surface of the console, but her mind was far away, replaying the hours of training and preparation. Earth's fleet, though small, was fast, agile, and equipped with the most cutting-edge weapons their scientists had managed to create. But would it be enough? Could humanity truly stand against the Empire? Captain Mitchell, came a voice behind her, pulling her out of her thoughts. She turned to see Lieutenant Adams, her communications officer, standing at attention. We've received confirmation. The Empire's fleet will arrive in 12 hours. Her heart sank as the weight of the news settled in. 12 hours. It felt like no time at all. But she wasn't going to let fear take over. I know. Prepare the crew. Let's make sure our ships are ready. Her voice was steady, but inside, her nerves were in turmoil. She had seen what the Empire's fleets could do. Her crew, her soldiers, had seen the devastation they left in their wake. The odds were against them, and even the bravest of hearts couldn't deny that fear gnawed at the edge of their minds. She looked at the empty spaces in the vast hangar bay where Earth's prototype ships stood. A few of them were still being armed, their sleek, shiny exteriors glowing under the artificial lights. Sarah knew these ships had been designed for one purpose: survival. But could they truly survive against an entire empire? The mockery, the laughter she had heard echoing from the High Council's chamber, played in her mind. It was easy to laugh when you didn't understand what your opponent was capable of. I won't let them destroy everything, she whispered to herself, clenching her fists. The human spirit, despite being underestimated and ignored for centuries, was not easily broken. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the Empire's fleet was already mobilizing. Captain Torek, a towering figure from the Hekar race, stood at the helm of the flagship ship, a vessel of unimaginable power. He was a warrior, and to him, the human fleet was nothing more than an insignificant annoyance. He had dealt with far worse in his long career. His eyes, cold and calculating, scanned the map of Earth. His species had crushed worlds before, and Earth would be no different. The humans were nothing more than insects. To destroy them would be no challenge. "Prepare the fleet for battle," Torek commanded. His voice was deep and resonant, filled with the authority of one who had never known defeat. He didn't even flinch when he heard the reports of the human fleet preparing for a fight. The humans were desperate, fighting for a world they knew they would lose, and they wouldn't survive. Not against the Empire. He turned to his officers. "We will show them the power of the Empire. Wipe them out completely. Leave nothing standing." His words were met with a chorus of approval from the rest of his crew. They knew the drill: overwhelm, crush, and leave no survivors. It was the way the Empire did things, and they had never failed. Back on Earth, Captain Mitchell was watching the clock. The tension in the air was palpable, but there was no turning back now. The last few hours were a blur of final preparations, last-minute drills, and heartfelt goodbyes. Each member of her crew knew what was at stake, and none of them were ready to die without a fight. They wouldn't go down quietly. The countdown had begun. And then, as the final hour ticked away, Earth's fleet, the prototypes the Empire had mocked, stood ready for battle. They were small, and they were outnumbered, but they were human, and that was something the Empire had overlooked. The laughter from the Empire's High Council still echoed in her mind, but it only made her more determined. "Let them laugh," Sarah muttered, her voice steady and calm as she gripped the armrests of her captain's chair. "They won't be laughing for long." The battle for Earth was about to begin, and no matter how small their fleet, no matter how many the Empire brought, they were going to fight back, with everything they had. And if they lost, the galaxy would know one thing for certain: Earth was not a place to be mocked. The moment had arrived. The vast blackness of space stretched endlessly before Earth's prototype fleet, now fully assembled and ready. Captain Sarah Mitchell stood at the helm of the lead ship, her eyes fixed on the stars ahead. The crew moved with a precision born of years of training, their faces steely with determination despite the overwhelming odds. No one spoke. There was no need for words. They knew what was coming. The Empire was on its way, and it was ready to wipe them out. Behind them, the silhouette of Earth appeared on the starboard side, a beautiful, fragile blue and white marble suspended in the void. Earth, their home, the place they had sworn to protect, was counting on them. A sense of pride and responsibility weighed heavy on Sarah's shoulders. But there was something more, something deeper, a fire that refused to be extinguished. They had been underestimated, laughed at, but now it was time to prove the Empire wrong. It was time for humanity to stand and fight. The Empire's fleet was coming in fast, a massive wave of ships, hundreds of them, each one a monstrous behemoth of destruction. The sheer size and power of the ships were enough to make anyone hesitate, but Sarah didn't flinch. Neither did the rest of the crew. The prototype ships, though smaller and fewer in number, were designed to be fast, agile, and most importantly, unpredictable. They had one advantage: surprise. The Empire didn't know what to expect. "Captain, fleet incoming. They're entering our range in 3 minutes, said Lieutenant Adams, his voice tight with tension as he monitored the enemy's advance. "Understood," Sarah replied, her voice calm but firm. She took a deep breath, pushing aside the doubt that threatened to creep into her mind. "Prepare for engagement, get our defenses up, and make sure all systems are online. We fight for Earth today." As the seconds ticked down, the tension in the control room thickened. On the bridge, every officer was glued to their station, their fingers poised over their consoles. There was no room for error. Not today. The Empire would not give them a second chance. "Targeting systems online," reported Lieutenant Torres, the weapons officer. "Energy shields fully charged," said Ensign Carter, the navigator. Sarah nodded. Her heart was pounding in her chest, but she refused to let the fear show. "All right, let's do this. All ships, prepare to engage the enemy." The time had come. With one final glance at the Earth below, Sarah turned her attention to the incoming fleet, her gaze as sharp and cold as the metal hull beneath her feet. The enemy was in range. The ships of the Galactic Empire filled the view screen, their massive silhouettes blotting out the stars behind them. Their weapon systems hummed to life, already charging. The enemy fleet was vast, the ships enormous, their designs sleek and intimidating. Each one looked like it could swallow Earth's fleet whole. The Empire had come to crush them, to make sure humanity would never threaten their power. But the humans weren't ready to roll over and die. Not yet. Not when Earth still had breath in her lungs. "They think we're weak," Sarah murmured to herself. "Let's show them how wrong they are." The first shots rang out across the silence of space. Brilliant flashes of light filled the viewports as the Empire's weapons opened fire. The humans' defensive shields flared to life, shimmering as they absorbed the onslaught. Earth's ships were fast, darting through the void like wasps, quick and nimble. The Empire's ships were slow to react. They hadn't expected such speed. "Return fire," Sarah ordered, her voice cutting through the tension. "Target their shields first." Firing, Lieutenant Torrid shouted. The prototype ships unleashed their weapons in a coordinated burst, a volley of energy blasts streaking toward the nearest Empire ship. The impact shook the ship's frame as the shields flared and flickered, but it wasn't enough. The enemy ship's defenses were stronger than Earth's prototypes had anticipated. They needed something more, something to turn the tide. "We're going to need a new strategy," Lieutenant Adams called out, his eyes scanning the battlefield. "The enemy is just too overwhelming." Sarah's mind raced. She had known the odds were slim, but the sight of the Empire's massive fleet in front of them, unyielding and relentless, was a reminder of how little they had. But there was still one thing they could count on. The prototype ships had been designed to outmaneuver, to strike fast, and leave before the enemy could retaliate. They just needed to keep moving, to keep the Empire guessing. "I know," Sarah said, her voice calm but resolute. "We'll hit them where it hurts. Focus fire on their engines. We need to slow them down." The crew moved in unison, adjusting their tactics as they dodged incoming blasts and focused their firepower on the Empire's engines. The first hit landed with devastating precision, sending a shockwave through the nearest Empire ship. For the first time, a ripple of doubt spread through the enemy ranks. Earth's fleet was more than just toys. It was dangerous. The humans weren't giving up. But the Empire wasn't going to take this lightly. In the depths of their fleet, a signal was sent. Reinforcements were on the way. The Empire's elite forces were being called to join the fight. "Captain, we've got more ships incoming," Lieutenant Adams reported, his voice strained. "They're sending in the big guns." Sarah's heart sank as the Empire's reinforcements began to emerge from the far reaches of space. These were the Empire's best, a fleet of ships larger and more heavily armed than anything Earth had seen. There was no way they could outrun these ships, not with so many on their tail. "We need to hold out for as long as we can," Sarah said, her mind racing. "Get ready for evasive maneuvers. We can't let them corner us." But despite their best efforts, the Empire's forces kept coming, relentless and undeterred. Sarah's thoughts flashed back to the mockery she had heard in the Empire's council chambers. They had laughed at Earth's fleet, dismissing it as nothing more than a nuisance. They hadn't taken the humans seriously, and now they were beginning to regret that. The battle raged on, a dance of destruction in the vast emptiness of space, each side throwing everything they had at the other. And yet, despite the Empire's overwhelming power, the humans refused to give in. Every blast, every maneuver, every inch of space gained, it all counted. With every passing moment, the Empire began to realize that they might have underestimated their prey after all. And in the heart of the chaos, Sarah Mitchell, captain of Earth's prototype fleet, watched as her crew fought with everything they had. They were small, they were outnumbered, but they were not weak. And as the battle grew fiercer, one thing became clear. The Empire might have the numbers, but Earth had something they couldn't measure. They had the will to fight. The battle raged across the void of space, a chaotic symphony of destruction and defiance. Captain Sarah Mitchell's hands were steady on the helm, despite the storm of fire that raged outside. The first wave of the Empire's fleet had been met with unexpected resistance, but the reinforcements that had arrived, ships so massive and powerful that even the stars seemed to shrink in their presence, were another story. The odds were no longer just against them. They were nearly insurmountable. But Sarah refused to give up. Every shot fired, every ship that exploded in a flash of brilliant light, only fueled her resolve. She watched as Earth's prototype ships, smaller, faster, and more agile than their enemies, danced in and out of the fight, firing, and then retreating before the Empire's mighty ships could retaliate. "Captain, we've lost contact with the Bravo Squadron." Lieutenant Adams shouted, his voice laced with panic as he checked the communications console. "They're gone, sir." Sarah's heart clenched, but she didn't allow the fear to take root. They had known this would be costly, but every ship lost was a reminder of why they couldn't fail. Earth had no backup plan. There was no second chance. "Give them the order to engage," Sarah said, her voice firm despite the sinking feeling in her gut. "We fight until there's nothing left to fight with." In the battle's chaos, she could see the massive warships of the Empire closing in on them. Their weapons were devastating, each shot a death sentence to anything in its path. The explosions lit up space like fireworks, but these were not celebrations. This was war. "Reinforcements are coming in fast," Lieutenant Torres, the weapons officer, called out, his eyes glued to his console. "We need to act quickly." Sarah's eyes darted to the view screen. The battle had become a deadly dance, with Earth's fleet darting in and out of the Empire's grasp, never staying long enough for a lethal strike, but always drawing fire. The human ships were designed for speed, but now they were using it like a weapon, whittling down the Empire's forces, one skirmish at a time. "Target their main reactors," Sarah ordered, her mind racing with strategy. "If we can hit them where it hurts, we might just stand a chance." The Empire's fleet was not invincible. Their warships were massive, their weapons powerful, but they had one glaring weakness: speed. Their ships, designed for overwhelming firepower, were cumbersome. They weren't built for the agile, rapid warfare that Earth's fleet was, and it was that weakness that Sarah intended to exploit. Her orders were clear. They would strike hard and fast, a hit-and-run strategy. If they could disrupt the Empire's supply lines, damage the key systems that powered their ships, they might stand a chance of turning the tide. "Target locked," Lieutenant Torres said, his voice filled with focus as he input the firing coordinates. "Fire," Sarah commanded. The energy beams shot across space, cutting through the emptiness like lightning in the dark. The blast struck the belly of one of the Empire's colossal warships, causing a massive explosion that tore through its outer layers. The ship shuddered, then went dark as its systems failed. The prototype ship swerved to the side, narrowly avoiding return fire, as the enemy vessel broke apart in a fiery display of destruction. For a moment, Sarah allowed herself a brief exhale. One down, but she couldn't afford to relax. Not yet. The Empire would retaliate, and it would be brutal. The remaining enemy ships began to move into position, ready to corner the humans. "I need those defensive shields online," she barked, her eyes locked on the approaching Empire fleet. "All ships, keep moving. Don't let them lock onto you." Earth's fleet scattered, each ship moving in a different direction, hoping to confuse the enemy, to make themselves hard targets. It was a tactic they had perfected in training, but now, in the heat of battle, it felt more like a desperate maneuver than a planned strategy. "Shields holding, for now," Ensign Carter, the navigator, said through clenched teeth. "But the Empire is closing in fast. We won't last long." Sarah glanced at the view screen. The Empire's fleet had spread out, encircling them. The space around them was thick with the hum of energy blasts, the deafening silence of space, shattered only by the sound of alarms blaring throughout the bridge. It was clear now. The Empire wasn't here to negotiate or capture. They were here to annihilate. But Sarah wasn't about to let them win. Not without a fight. "Move us to the outer perimeter," she commanded. "Lieutenant Adams, get me a visual on their command ship. We're going for the heart. We're too exposed there," Adams warned, his hands trembling as he input the commands. "If we go to the outer perimeter, we'll be sitting ducks." "I'm aware of the risks," Sarah said, her voice cold and unwavering. "But we need to disrupt their command structure. Without that, there'll be nothing but mindless destruction. We take out their leader, we take out the rest." The ship rumbled as it began to maneuver, the engines flaring to life. Every movement of the prototype ships now felt like a gamble. Each turn, each dodge, each shift in speed was an attempt to outsmart the overwhelming might of the Empire. The Empire's ships, however, were closing in, their weapons charging once again. And as Sarah watched them come, she knew this was it. She glanced at the faces of her crew. They were exhausted, their hands trembling with fatigue, but there was no quitting now. Sarah had led them into this fight, and now it was up to her to lead them through it. Their families, their homes, their future, all of it depended on this. "We're almost there," Sarah said, her voice tight with determination. "Hold steady. And when I say fire, I want every ship to give it everything they have." The enemy ships loomed larger, the gaps closing between the two sides. Sarah's breath quickened as the heart of the Empire's fleet came into view, a massive, imposing vessel, the flagship of the Imperial Navy. It towered above the other ships, a symbol of the Empire's power. It was where their command came from, where their orders originated. If they could destroy that ship, the Empire's forces would fall into disarray. "We're within range," Lieutenant Torres said, his eyes narrowed in concentration. "Now," Sarah shouted. The fleet responded in an instant. Energy blasts tore through the darkness of space, streaking toward the command ship. The Empire's flagship was well armored, but it was not invulnerable. The blasts struck home, first weakening its shields, then breaking through its outer defenses. There was a moment of stunned silence before the flagship erupted in a spectacular explosion, its massive form splintering apart as the energy cascaded outward. For a brief moment, it felt as if time stood still. Then, chaos erupted once again. The Empire's forces faltered. Their ships slowed, disoriented by the loss of their command center. But this wasn't over yet. The Empire would retaliate with even more fury, more force than ever before. "We've hurt them, but they won't give up that easily," Sarah murmured to herself, the weight of the battle pressing down on her shoulders. But as long as they still had breath, as long as they could fight, they would not stop. And Earth would not fall. Not today. The void of space was now filled with the sounds of chaos. Explosions, the whine of energy blasts, the crackle of communications. Captain Sarah Mitchell stood at the helm, eyes glued to the view screen as her ship, the Eagle, danced through the debris of battle. The flagship of the Empire had been destroyed, but Sarah knew that it was only the beginning of a much larger conflict. The Empire would not back down so easily. "They're coming for us," Lieutenant Adams said from the tactical station, his voice grim. "The remaining Imperial fleet is reorganizing. They're pissed, and they're not going to let that loss slide." Sarah clenched her fists, the weight of the moment settling over her like a heavy cloak. They had taken down the heart of the Empire's forces, but now the remaining fleet was tightening its grip. The Empire's ships were everywhere, massive, imposing, and closing in on Earth's fragile fleet. And Sarah could feel the pressure building. Time was running out. "Captain, we've got incoming," Lieutenant Torres, the weapons officer, shouted, his eyes wide with alarm. "They've begun their counterattack. It's massive. They're launching everything they have left." The view screen flashed with multiple signatures, and the shape of the Imperial warships loomed on the horizon. Earth's fleet was outgunned and outnumbered, no doubt about it. But Sarah wasn't about to let them die quietly. They had come this far, and she would not let the Empire have the last word. "We won't go down easy," she said, her voice unwavering despite the rising tide of panic that threatened to overwhelm her. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers. Get our engines at full power. We hit them where it counts. Fast and hard." The ship lurched as the engines roared to life, the Eagle shooting forward with incredible speed. The other prototype ships followed suit, weaving in and out of the advancing Imperial forces. Despite their superior size, the Empire's ships were slow to react to the speed and agility of Earth's fleet. Sarah watched as the first barrage of Imperial fire slammed into the space where they had just been, leaving only empty space and lingering shockwaves in its wake. But that wouldn't last forever. The Empire would adapt quickly, and when they did, there would be no escape. "Shield holding," Ensign Carter, the navigator, said, his hands moving rapidly over the control panels. "But they're targeting us directly. We can't keep dodging forever." Sarah knew it, but right now it was all they had: speed, agility, the element of surprise. Earth's ships were built for this very purpose, to move fast and strike before the enemy could even react. But that would only carry them so far. They needed something more. "Let's turn the tables," Sarah said, her eyes narrowing. She turned to Lieutenant Adams. "Initiate Phase 2 of the battle plan. I want every ship to follow me into the heart of their formation. We're going to hit them with everything we've got." Adams looked at her, hesitating for a moment. "Are you sure about this, Captain? We'll be exposed, completely surrounded." "I know," Sarah replied, her tone hard. "But if we can take down enough of their fleet, the rest will break. Trust me." The bridge fell silent as the crew exchanged nervous glances, but no one questioned her. They had all seen what Earth's fleet could do. They had already turned the tide once. Now it was time to do it again. "All ships, follow my lead," Sarah barked into the comms. The fleet moved as one, weaving through the Imperial forces with precision. The Eagle led the charge, a blazing streak of light through the darkness of space. They were diving straight into the heart of the enemy formation, heading straight for the largest Imperial cruiser. It was a bold move, one that would expose them to overwhelming fire. But if they could bring it down, it would break the Imperial line. That ship was the key to the Empire's remaining strength. "Energy levels critical," Lieutenant Torres said, his voice tight. "We have to make every shot count, Captain." "We will," Sarah said, her eyes fixed on the flagship, which was now looming larger than ever. "Fire at will." The prototype ships opened fire, their weapons lighting up space in a furious blaze of energy. Blasts slammed into the massive hull of the Imperial cruiser, rattling it as it shuddered under the assault. But the ship wasn't going down so easily. Its shields flared brightly as they absorbed the blasts, and then, without warning, it retaliated. A massive energy blast erupted from the cruiser's guns, slamming into the Eagle's shields with such force that Sarah was nearly thrown from her seat. "Shields failing," Ensign Carter shouted, his voice barely audible over the sound of alarms blaring throughout the bridge. Sarah felt the ship lurch again as another blast hit them, sending the entire crew scrambling to stay steady. She gritted her teeth, refusing to let the fear consume her. This was the moment. They couldn't stop now. "Hold it together, people," she shouted, her voice full of steel. "We're not backing down." The Eagle shuddered again, and Sarah glanced at her damage report. The ship was losing power in several key systems. The engines were still running, but not at full capacity. The shields were weak, flickering, and barely holding up. But the mission wasn't over. Not yet. They had one chance left, one final shot to make the Empire realize just how wrong they were to underestimate humanity. "Captain," Lieutenant Adams said, urgency in his voice. "The enemy's backup ships are almost here. If we don't break their formation now, we're finished." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she looked at the incoming Imperial reinforcements. They were outgunned, outmatched, and yet they still had a fighting chance. Her mind raced, and then, like a spark, the solution came to her. She could see it, right in front of her, the gap in the Empire's formation. "Lieutenant Adams, I want you to open a direct comm link to all ships in the fleet," she said, her voice low but full of conviction. "Tell them to make a final push. We're going to break their formation. Follow me." She punched in the final coordinates into the nav system and then hit the engines again, pushing the Eagle into overdrive. The ship shot forward, rocketing into the heart of the Imperial formation, and Earth's fleet followed in perfect synchronization. As they neared the Imperial flagship once more, Sarah took a deep breath, the weight of the moment pressing heavily on her shoulders. This was it. If they couldn't break the formation now, they wouldn't survive. The last wave of energy blasts erupted from Earth's fleet, overwhelming the flagship's shields and tearing into its hull. For a moment, everything slowed. Then, the Empire's ship exploded in a burst of light so bright it seemed to shake the very stars themselves. The shockwave blasted through space, sending smaller ships tumbling, their engines dead. "Direct hit," Lieutenant Torrid shouted, his voice full of disbelief. "We did it, Captain. We actually did it." The bridge erupted in cheers. But Sarah's heart didn't lift. She knew the battle was far from over. The Empire had lost one flagship, but they still had hundreds of ships out there, and they would come for them with everything they had left. But Sarah Mitchell knew one thing for sure: they would fight. Until the very last breath. Because the fight for Earth had only just begun. And this time, they weren't going to lose. The explosion of the Imperial flagship still hung in the silence of space like a distant echo, its fiery remains scattered across the void. For a moment, Sarah Mitchell allowed herself a brief exhale, but she couldn't afford to linger in the relief. The battle was far from over. They had dealt the Empire a powerful blow, but their forces were still vast and unrelenting. Their retaliation would come in waves, and each wave would be more dangerous than the last. "Status report," Sarah barked, her voice cutting through the momentary silence that had fallen over the bridge. She could feel the tension in the air, the exhausted but determined faces of her crew, each of them knowing that this victory was fleeting if they couldn't push forward. "Captain," Lieutenant Adams said, his voice tense, "we've taken heavy damage. Shields are at 30%, and the starboard engines are offline. We're limping, but we're still functional." "Where's the rest of the fleet?" Sarah asked, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the view screen. Through the shattered remains of the Imperial flagship, she could see several other ships advancing, but Earth's fleet was in disarray, scattered across the battlefield. "They've scattered in all directions," Lieutenant Torres answered, his fingers moving rapidly over the console. "Some are engaging enemy forces directly. Others are retreating. It's chaos." Sarah gritted her teeth. They had to reorganize, and fast. If they didn't, the Empire would pick them off one by one. "Lieutenant Adams, get the fleet back in formation. We can't afford to be disjointed. We hit them together, or we lose." Adams nodded, already working to send the orders. "On it, Captain." "Ensign Carter, can we jump to a different location? Get us out of here." The navigator hesitated. "The jump engines are damaged. We've lost 20% of the power grid. We won't be able to use a jump for a while." That was a blow. Without the jump drives, they were trapped in the heart of the battlefield, at the mercy of the Empire. But there was no time to dwell on that. Sarah had seen enough in the last few days to know that humanity would not back down. The Empire had underestimated them before, and now the tables had turned. The question was, could they keep up the pressure long enough to make a difference? "We're not out of options yet," Sarah muttered, more to herself than anyone else. "Get those engines back online, Carter. Do whatever it takes." The ship groaned as Carter worked furiously at the console. Sarah watched him, her mind racing. They had only one shot to win this. The prototype ships had proven to be formidable, but the Empire's fleet was immense. Every second they spent vulnerable was another second they could be wiped out. A sudden transmission cut through the air, its cold, mechanical voice sending a shiver down Sarah's spine. "This is Admiral Valen of the Imperial Fleet," the voice said, devoid of any warmth. "Captain Sarah Mitchell, your defiance will be met with utter destruction. Surrender now, and your people may live. Continue to resist, and we will annihilate every last one of you." Sarah's lips pressed into a tight line. The Admiral's words hung in the air, cold and final. But Sarah was no longer afraid. The Empire had underestimated them before, and they would do so again. "Admiral Valen, this is Captain Sarah Mitchell of the Eagle," Sarah replied, her voice steady and unwavering. "If you think we will bow to you, you're gravely mistaken. We're not going anywhere. You want Earth. You'll have to take it from us, and we'll make sure it's a fight you'll never forget." There was a long pause, then a sharp, almost mocking laugh from the Admiral. "You will regret this, Captain. Your fleet will be shattered. The Empire has no equal. Surrender now, and we might spare you." "We'll see about that," Sarah said, cutting the comm link. She turned to her crew, her eyes steely with determination. "Get the fleet back in position. We're not running. We're fighting." The battle continued to rage around them. As Earth's fleet regrouped, Sarah could see the Empire's reinforcements arriving. The numbers were overwhelming. Sarah knew the truth. They couldn't outlast the Empire. Their only hope was to inflict enough damage to make the Empire question whether Earth was worth the fight. "Status report on our remaining ammo," Sarah asked, her gaze never leaving the view screen. "We've got about 20% left," Lieutenant Torres said, his voice tense. "It's running low fast. If we can't break their line soon, we'll be sitting ducks." Sarah's heart pounded as she watched the vast Imperial fleet moving into position. They were closing in, their ships like massive black shadows in the distance. Their guns powered up, each one aimed directly at Earth's remaining ships. The Empire was preparing to unleash everything they had left. She turned to Lieutenant Adams. "We have one chance to make this count. Find the flagship's weak point. I don't care how long it takes, but we need to bring that ship down. Now." Adams nodded, his fingers flying over the console as he worked to track the flagship's position. "There's a weak spot in the dorsal thruster array. If we can get in close enough, we can hit it with a concentrated blast." "Then that's what we're going to do," Sarah said. "Get us in close." The Eagle lurched forward, the engines straining under the weight of the maneuver. They were making a final push, one last attack to hit the Empire where it hurt most. The rest of Earth's fleet followed suit, moving in tight formation behind them. Space around them was ablaze with energy, ships darting and weaving between each other. The Empire's warships fired, but their aim was scattered. The distraction was working. Sarah could feel the pressure building in her chest as they closed in on their target. "Captain," Lieutenant Torres said, his voice filled with urgency, "we're in range. Do you want to fire?" Sarah glanced at the massive Imperial flagship, its looming presence almost mocking her. It was the heart of the Empire's remaining power. If they could take it down, the rest of the fleet would crumble. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. This was it. The final gamble. "Fire," Sarah said, her voice cold and steady. The Eagle's weapons came to life. The concentrated blast tore through space, slamming into the dorsal thruster array of the flagship with explosive force. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, the flagship erupted in a series of violent explosions, its entire aft section splitting apart as the shockwave cascaded through the fleet. The remaining Imperial ships faltered. The formation broke. The flagship, their command center, was gone. "Captain," Lieutenant Adams said, his voice full of disbelief. "We did it. It's over. Their command ship is destroyed." Sarah stood still, her heart hammering in her chest. But she knew this was only the beginning. The Empire would come for them with even more fury. But she also knew one thing. The fight was far from over, and as long as they had breath in their bodies, Earth would not surrender. They had come too far to stop now. Not yet, Sarah said, her voice quiet but filled with certainty. The battle's just begun. Get ready. We're not done fighting. The explosion of the Imperial flagship still echoed in Sarah Mitchell's mind, the lingering shockwave radiating through space. The victory felt hollow. They had struck a massive blow to the Empire, but they knew it wouldn't be long before they retaliated. The remnants of the Imperial fleet were retreating, but it was only temporary. They were licking their wounds, regrouping and strategizing for the next phase of the war. The Empire had underestimated humanity once, but now they were going to learn that it would not be the last. The Eagle and the rest of Earth's fleet were floating in the aftermath of the battle, battered and bruised. Every ship had taken heavy damage, shields failing, engines sputtering, and weapons systems reduced to a fraction of their full capacity. But Sarah could see it in the eyes of her crew, the same determination that had fueled them since the beginning. They hadn't given up then, and they sure as hell weren't about to now. "We're not out of the woods yet," Sarah said, her voice steady but full of an edge that could cut through steel. "Get our status report. We need to know exactly what we're working with before we make our next move." Lieutenant Adams turned to face her, his face grim. "Captain, the fleet's mostly intact, but we've got serious issues. Shields are down to 10%. Our weapons are almost offline. Engines are working, but just barely. We've got enough power for maybe 1 or 2 more attacks, and then we're sitting ducks." "We knew this was coming," Sarah said, leaning forward in her chair, the weight of their situation sinking in. "What about the other ships? Can we coordinate with them for a combined offensive?" Adams hesitated. "The rest of the fleet is scattered. A few ships are in worse shape than we are. The rest are trying to hold out, but it's every ship for itself right now. We'll need to regroup." Sarah's eyes darkened. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her. The Empire's response would be swift and brutal. They had taken the flagship, but now they had to deal with the Empire's full wrath. And with their ships damaged, the battle to come would be even more difficult. "We don't have the luxury of time," Sarah said, her voice firm. "Get in contact with the fleet. We need to consolidate our forces. Every ship that can fight, bring them here. We're going to hit them again, and this time, we're going to take down the rest of their fleet." As Lieutenant Adams worked to relay the orders, Sarah stood at the view screen, watching as Imperial ships slowly moved in from the edges of the battlefield. They were massive, intimidating, and relentless. The Empire was not going to let their defeat go unanswered. Their fleet was already forming up into a new battle line, and Sarah could sense their growing desperation. The remaining Imperial ships were like a wall of steel and fire, massive and looming as they made their way toward Earth's fleet. Sarah knew that in their current condition, they couldn't take them head-on. They needed to be smart about this. They had the advantage of speed and agility, but that was quickly running out. Earth's fleet was too damaged, too scattered. They would need something more, a stroke of genius, a plan that could break the Empire's overwhelming force. "Carter," Sarah said, turning to her navigator, "how long until our jump drives are fully operational?" Carter, his face pale from exhaustion, looked up from the console. "It'll take at least an hour, Captain. Maybe longer. We're down to emergency power." "That's too long," Sarah muttered. "We don't have an hour. We need to be ready to move as soon as possible. Find another option." Adams stepped forward. "Captain, if I may, I've been analyzing their formation. There's a weakness. The rear flank of the Imperial fleet is less protected. It's vulnerable, especially now that their flagship is gone. If we can push through and cause enough chaos, we could force them into retreat." Sarah's gaze sharpened as she turned to him. "What's your plan?" Adams straightened, his eyes gleaming with determination. "We get in close, faster than they expect. We hit them with everything we have. our remaining weapons, our remaining firepower, and then we hit them hard. We'll cause enough damage to make them rethink their strategy. If we break through the rear flank, we can disrupt their entire formation." It was a risky move, an all-in bet, but it was the only chance they had. "I'm listening," Sarah said, leaning in. "We'll move at full speed and get as close as possible to their rear. Once we're in range, we release everything. Missiles, plasma bursts, anything we have left. Then we use the remaining firepower to cripple their backup ships. We create chaos, confusion, and fear. Once that happens, we push forward, and the rest of the fleet can follow our lead." Sarah considered the plan. It was dangerous, but it had one thing going for it: surprise. If they could hit the Imperial fleet where it was weakest, the momentum might just shift in their favor. She glanced around the bridge, seeing the faces of her crew, tired but ready to fight. They had all come so far. "Do it," she said with a voice full of resolve. "Prepare the fleet. We move out in 5 minutes." The crew sprang into action, working quickly to execute the plan. It wasn't perfect, but it was their best shot. The countdown began, and the tension in the air became palpable. They knew the odds were against them. They knew that every move they made could be their last. But they also knew one thing: they had no choice but to fight. They couldn't let the Empire win. Not now. Not after everything they had fought for. As the Eagle moved forward, the rest of the fleet followed in tight formation, their engines blazing as they surged toward the Imperial rear. The Empire's ships, still reeling from the destruction of their flagship, hadn't fully anticipated Earth's next move. The Imperial fleet was starting to realize their mistake, but it was already too late. Sarah gritted her teeth as the Eagle surged forward. The plan was in motion, and they couldn't afford to stop now. "Engage," she ordered. The Eagle unleashed a barrage of weapons, plasma bursts, missiles, and energy blasts, ripping through the rear of the Imperial fleet. The explosion of fire and debris tore through space as their first salvo hit home. It was the beginning of the chaos they needed. The Imperial forces were thrown into disarray, their ships moving erratically as they tried to regroup. But Earth's fleet wasn't done yet. They pushed forward with everything they had, hitting the backup ships with precision and force. "Captain," Lieutenant Torres called out, his voice full of disbelief, "we've crippled their rear fleet. The rest of the Imperial ships are in retreat." Sarah allowed herself a moment of victory. The Empire was retreating, and Earth had struck a decisive blow. But she knew it wasn't over. Not yet. The Imperial fleet was regrouping, and soon they would come back with more firepower. But for now, Earth had won a battle, and that was all that mattered. "Keep pushing," Sarah said, her voice fierce. "We can't let them recover. They've tasted defeat, and they won't like it. Make sure they know we're coming." As Earth's fleet pressed forward, Sarah stood tall, her resolve hardened. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. The Empire had underestimated them before. They wouldn't make that mistake again. But next time, Earth would be ready. The Imperial fleet was retreating, but Sarah Mitchell knew better than to trust in fleeting moments of victory. Earth's fleet was battered, scared from the previous engagement, and their resources were running low. The Empire's retreat wasn't a surrender. It was a strategic repositioning. They were far from done. Sarah stood at the view screen, watching as the retreating ships of the Empire gathered at the edge of the battle zone. Their massive warships were retreating into the blackness, their engines pulsing with the energy to jump away to safer territory. It wasn't over. The real fight was just about to begin. "Status report," Sarah said, her voice steady but with an underlying edge of anxiety. Lieutenant Adams was at his station, his eyes scanning the data coming through. "Captain, we've inflicted heavy damage, but the Empire is already mobilizing a larger fleet. We're outnumbered. The jump engines are still offline, and we don't have enough energy for another full offensive." "Damn it," Sarah muttered. She wasn't sure how much more the fleet could take. The odds were stacked against them, and Earth's forces had just barely managed to hold their own so far. The Empire was regrouping, and when they came back, they wouldn't hesitate. The next strike would be worse than the last. "We have to think fast," Sarah said, turning from the view screen to face her crew. "Get me a communications link to all remaining ships in the fleet. We need to form a plan. We can't afford to just wait for them to come back at us." The comms officer nodded, already setting up the link. "Linking now, Captain." Sarah exhaled deeply as she prepared for what was to come. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot they had left. She had always known that Earth's true strength wasn't in its weaponry or its ships. The strength was in the people. And if they could push the Empire to the breaking point, they might just have a chance. "Captain Mitchell," the voice of Admiral Reynolds crackled through the speaker, "we've received your orders, and we're ready to follow your lead." "Good," Sarah replied, trying to sound confident even though her mind was racing. "This is it, Admiral. We're not just defending anymore. We're going on the offensive. Our target is their command fleet. We've already taken out their flagship. If we can take out the rest of their leadership, the fleet will lose its coordination. They'll scatter." Reynolds's voice was filled with resolve. "Understood, Captain. We'll gather our remaining forces and get into position. But we'll need time. The Empire will be expecting us." "Time isn't something we have," Sarah said. "But we'll make it work. Earth's fleet is fragmented, but we need to regroup and hit them before they can react. Push them harder than they've ever been pushed before." The comms officer nodded and began sending out the orders. Sarah's heart was pounding as she stood before the view screen, watching the last of the Imperial ships slip into the abyss of space, preparing to make their jump. The decision was simple. Earth could either wait for the Empire to come back and crush them, or they could take the fight directly to the Empire, strike with everything they had left. Her decision was made in a heartbeat. "Adams, what's the status on the jump drives?" Sarah asked, keeping her eyes fixed on the retreating enemy fleet. She couldn't afford to waste any time. "The drives are still down, Captain," Adams replied, his voice filled with frustration. "We're on backup power. It'll take another several hours to get them back online. We're completely dependent on our remaining energy reserves." That was another blow. Earth's fleet was relying on its current position, but time wasn't something they could afford to waste. The Empire wouldn't be gone for long. Sarah clenched her fists. "We'll make it work," she said, her voice hardening with determination. "Adams, coordinate with the fleet. Get them into a defensive position. If we can't move, then we'll make them come to us. We'll be waiting for them when they return." Lieutenant Adams nodded, already moving to execute the plan. As he worked, Sarah turned to Lieutenant Torres, the ship's weapons officer. "Lieutenant Torres, we have no more heavy firepower left. What's the status of our remaining weapons?" "We still have a few missiles, Captain, but they're low yield, and our primary cannons are offline," Torres replied. "We've got basic laser systems, but they're not enough to fight the Empire's fleet head-on. We'll need to get creative." Sarah didn't like what she was hearing. They were down to their last resources, and they had to make every shot count. If they didn't strike soon, they might not get another chance. "Creative," Sarah murmured, her mind racing. There was only one option left, something they had been avoiding. They had never needed to rely on this before, but now, with the Empire preparing for another round, they had no choice. She turned to Carter. "Ensign Carter, I need you to prep the cloaking system." Carter's eyes widened. "Captain, we don't have the energy for the cloak. It'll drain the last of our reserves, and we'll be vulnerable." "I know," Sarah replied, "but we need to get close enough to the enemy fleet to strike at their weak points without being detected. The only way we'll succeed is if we're invisible to them. We can't risk them finding us first. We'll use what we have left to deliver the final blow." Carter hesitated, glancing over the controls, then nodded. "Understood, Captain." As the crew scrambled to implement the plan, Sarah sat back in her chair, her thoughts consumed by what lay ahead. She had no illusions about what would happen if they failed. The Empire would return with reinforcements and crush them. But if they succeeded, the Empire would know that Earth was not a force to be taken lightly. Sarah thought of her crew, of the families back on Earth, of everyone they were fighting to protect. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for their future, for the chance to keep their homes safe. She knew the stakes, and she knew what they had to do. "Captain," Lieutenant Adams called, his voice tense. "We're ready. The fleet is in position, and the cloak is activated. We're ready to move." Sarah took a deep breath. This was it. They had one shot. "Engage," Sarah ordered, her voice unwavering. The Eagle and the rest of Earth's fleet powered forward, cloaked and invisible to the Imperial forces. For the first time, the tables were turned. They were hunting the Empire, not the other way around. Sarah felt a strange calm wash over her as they slipped through the vast emptiness of space, drawing closer to their target, the Imperial command fleet. The tension in the air was palpable as they closed the distance. Every heartbeat felt like it would be their last. The time to strike had arrived. As they neared the command fleet, Sarah's eyes locked onto the view screen. There, in the distance, was the heart of the Empire's power. The command ships, their weapons systems powered down, their shields flickering as they prepared for the next phase of their operation. They had no idea what was coming. "Now," Sarah whispered. With one final push, they surged forward, breaking the cloak and unleashing every last weapon they had in their arsenal. The missiles struck first, followed by the rapid-fire laser cannons that carved through the Empire's command ship. The explosion lit up the void, the massive Imperial vessel shattering into pieces as it erupted in a violent fireball. The shockwave from the explosion rippled through space, sending the remaining Imperial fleet into chaos. Ships scattered in every direction, their communications scrambling, their officers caught off guard by the brutal assault. "Captain," Lieutenant Adams said, disbelief in his voice. We did it. They're retreating." Sarah's heart raced as she watched the Imperial fleet break apart. The remaining ships turned and fled, their retreat swift and uncoordinated. They were in disarray. "It's not over yet," Sarah said, her voice filled with resolve. "But we've shown them what we're capable of. We'll keep pushing until Earth is free." For the first time in days, Sarah allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. They had done it. They had taken down the heart of the Empire. But she knew this was just the beginning. The Empire would return with even more force. And Earth would be ready.